So this overview panel will serve as an introduction to the conference and really to provide sort of an overview of youth political and civic engagement from scholarly and programmatic lenses. So our first panelist, I'm going to introduce the panelists actually right before they get up and speak, but to give you a quick intro to them, the panelists are going to be Dr. Connie Flanagan, Heang Ly, and Barbara Ferman, and I'll tell you a little bit about them each right before they get up. So we're going to start with Connie Flanagan. So Dr. Flanagan's the Von Bascom Professor in Women, Family, and Community and Associate Dean of the School of Human Ecology at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Her scholarship focuses on adolescence political theories and on the factors in communities that foster identification with and action for the common good in young people. Her 2013 book, Teenage Citizens, The Political Theories of the Young, won the 2014 Best Authored Book Award from the Society of Research on Adolescence. She has many other awards and accolades to her name, but I'm going to cede the time to her so we can hear her voice, not mine. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Flanagan.
Thank you. I told Nancy I'd start out with a few comments on how this field has changed. So if you have as many gray hairs as I do, you've been going to these meetings for a long time. And usually we think social change doesn't happen, but I can tell you, as someone who's been going to these kind of meetings a long time, this field has changed. And I first want to sort of give a shout out to the activists and practitioners in the audience, because I think it's changed because you all have pushed scholars to think about what's happening on the ground. If you look at the name of this conference, Youth Act, one of the biggest ways in which this field has changed is it focuses not on transmission across generations from the older to the younger, but the ways in which young people exert agency, do things. And it's collective agency, it's collective action, it's not individuals having power all by themselves. So a huge way is that it's focused on youth and the various ways in which young people are political. Pippa Norris has a thing that youth are reinventing politics. If you simply think of the fact that we cannot use trend studies on newspaper reading as an indicator anymore of what has to do with interest or agency. So there's new forms, and there's new attention to the fact that youth aren't a monolithic group. So there's work on youth from various marginalized communities, immigrant youth, and how civic agency looks different, okay? But that they all have a voice. There's much more work on the settings, so it's not simply civic education, but the ways in which, if you'll hear Diana Hess later, so Hess and McAvoy's book talks about public spaces, but not partisan spaces, so it's not that teachers are telling kids what to think, but facilitating the conversations. It's boys and girls clubs, it's after school, and the ways in which those public spaces enable conversations. Lastly, I want to really emphasize that the field, because of things like collaboration with practitioners and activists, because of methods like community-based action research and engaging young people in formulating what the research questions ought to be, the whole area of youth activism and youth organizing has really surfaced as a way in which younger generations are actually having a voice. So I'll stop there and talk a bit about the work that we're doing now. So we call this work, excuse me, Young People in the Environmental Commons. Let's see, so I just go like this?
Forward. This way. That one. Oh, you have to point it over there. Sorry. I forgot a key detail of my instructions. Point at the AV people.
I'm pointing at them, right?
Yep.
How about if I... Oh, thanks. Okay, you can't do anything alone. See, that's the nature of civic work. You need friends. It's not done alone. Okay, what is civic? It has to do with being in communities, and those are broadly defined, but you cannot do civic work alone. So the commons refers to the broad community of the environment. We have been, I cannot take credit for this work. We have been documenting the work, again, of practitioners and teachers in the field, but we've been trying to get a kind of language to it in the way in which it's civic. The way, how we think of the environmental commons is natural resources support life, okay? Thus, they cannot be privatized. Nobody can own them. They belong to everybody, okay? So bottled water should not be, frankly. Seed saving, Monsanto should not be able to patent seeds. That supports life. So it's a social justice principle to think about the environmental commons, number one. The second aspect of the environmental commons is it belongs to everybody, so everybody needs to have a voice in public spaces about how we're going to negotiate preserving those natural resources. So kids have to have a voice. I use this in everything I do. It's a quote from Michael Walzer, who's a political theorist, and he uses terms like being political means being a member of a community where you have rights and responsibilities. So think about any classroom, any after-school program. That's where kids are learning about these principles. Now, there was a theory in political science called the tragedy of the commons. Essentially what it said is if you let people decide how to use natural resources, they're going to use them up. So this notion of, they'll graze it to death, okay? God love her, Elinor Ostrom, who was actually a political scientist who was marginalized in her discipline for many years, won the Nobel Prize several years ago in economics for saying, actually, that's not true. If, under certain conditions, and that is people are close to the issue, it's their community, if they understand that they need this and that others need this, they will not use up natural resources. So, and she said, because what the tragedy of the commons says is, you should leave it to the market and government, because people can't make those decisions. And Elinor Ostrom said, well, I don't think that's true, actually. And she went around the world looking at the ways in which people manage their natural resources. And under the conditions in which they had a group membership, in which they were close to the problem, in which they trusted one another, they didn't use them up. So essentially, she said, we have to, there's no reason to believe that bureaucrats and politicians do a better job than everyday people. So she really said passing citizenship and voting every 4 years is not enough. In fact, citizens are effectively told that they should be passive in this notion. The role of citizenship would be reduced to voting. Citizens are then supposed to sit back. She objected to that. I think most people in this room do as well. If you look, I want to switch just briefly to the environmental literature. It's a white world. Most of the work on the environment is taking kids out of urban areas and going to nature. In fact, the way to think about urban ecologies is the way in which human life is interdependent with natural resources. So we have in this work, and again, it's practitioners, it's teachers, it's community members who are doing the work. We have taken Elinor Ostrom's principles and studied them in the schools and the community-based organizations where these projects are going on, and the ways in which we think, like Ostrom has said, you preserve the commons is that you do place-based education close to the issue. You don't go away from the urban area. You look in the urban area at environmental problems. You work in a collaborative. So one of the big indicators in our studies, pre to post, is do kids realize that in order to solve environmental problems, you have to work with people who annoy you. I mean, we actually have a gain in that recognition. So that's collaborations where you have to discuss, you have to listen to other people's perspectives, and finally, you have to respect one another, okay? You have to understand that the commons belongs to all of you, and solving problems around the commons is a collaborative effort. I'm just going to briefly go through these. One big thing we've tried to look at it through this work is if you think about citizen science, because these kids are applying science that they learn in the classroom to local environmental problems. So it's a civic science nexus in these projects. Much of what's called citizen science out there is experts define the problem and they crowdsource data collection. That's not a civic model. What we're saying is citizens define the problem, they gather the data, they talk to one another, and they decide what's the civic solution. So what we're calling this is a much more egalitarian citizen science model. It suggests a different worldview, and that is men aren't at the top. They're one of the species among many, and that what we have to learn if we're going to preserve the environmental commons is we depend on each other, even other species. So this is the model, the REI model of environmental education, is white young people going out to the national parks. I mean, I love the national parks, but that's not the only model that we have to have. There's a great book by Carolyn Finney called White Spaces, Black Faces, which basically says if you look at environmental education or you look at our concepts of the natural environment, there are no people of color there, okay? In fact, most people in this country and increasingly in all the world live in urban spaces. So the interdependence of natural resources with urban life has to be the way we think about this. This is just to say, again, this is a partnership. I want to give great credit to the Great Lakes Stewardship Initiative, which is in the state of Michigan looking at place-based collaborations between schools and community groups. We work with the Southeast Michigan Stewardship Coalition, which is one of these hubs in that model. They're in Detroit, Ypsilanti, serious urban centers in Southeast Michigan. And the Spencer Foundation has funded this work. So it's a partnership model, it's place-based, and what we're trying to understand is through doing this kind of stuff, can you document how kids' concepts of themselves as stewards, of the collaborative nature of civic environmental work, and of nature as part of their urban ecology change. The last thing about this, it's collective learning, it's collaborative that the kids do. They are using science to solve public problems in their community, and they present their work to the mayor, the local mayor, to the water commissioner, to other students. So the civic nature of the work is also in the public presentation of what they've done. Just a few notes at the end here about the emphasis on urban kids, okay? One of the indicators we have from pre to post is, do they say, I notice nature in my community? I mean, that's to be able to look at it, to think about it, and to say you're responsible for its health because your community's health depends on it. One of the biggest civic concepts we've been looking at is the concept of interdependence. So if you saw the clicker, I needed Nancy to help me. Our lives are interdependent. We don't do things alone. And things, like I said before, the kids saying, I have to work with people I don't like, but to also understand that species we don't see or water systems that we take for granted, actually the health of our community depends on them. The one way in which urban populations have gotten recruited into environmental education is to think of it as a social justice issue. Where is the incinerator located? In the poor community, okay? So raising it to the level of you should be vigilant about this, it's your community, and who's making decisions about where the waste is put. Finally, this is an example of the kids actually collecting information about their watershed. It's an example of it's collaborative. It's an example of community partners and teachers working with those kids as co-educators. And lastly, for me, this statement by Robert Post, who's at the Yale Law School, that democracy is not about the making of decisions, but rather the authorship of decisions. Who has the agency? Who has the voice? Who gets listened to, and who gets to decide? Thank you.
Thank you, Connie. So next up, we have Heang Ly, the Director of Consulting and Training at the Center for Teen Empowerment in Boston. She provides technical support and skills training for nonprofits, businesses, foundations, schools, and city departments to ensure successful implementation of community and youth leadership initiatives. And she's an expert in the field of youth development, group facilitation, and nonprofit management. And I can also say I've worked with her before, and the Center for Teen Empowerment, you'll hear more from some of the young leaders from the Center for Teen Empowerment later in this conference, and they're doing great work, and I welcome Heang Ly to the podium.
Thank you. Can I make a request for a mic? And you'll see why, because no one
Or
can see
actually,
me
can this-
when I'm here, right?
Ah, yes. Can we use this one? Oh,
So, well, I think,
That's not connected to
Oh, it's not
anything.
going to work?
oh.
But we
Can
can
we
get you a
use one of the wireless
Okay.
mics? Great.
Yes, so as we get myself a wireless mic, I thought it would be important as part of, being able to see me, to actually hear me speak is to see me, so that's why I like to.
Two.
Sorry. Okay. So, like Nancy said, my name is Heang. I'm the Director of Consulting and Training at the Center for Teen Empowerment. We are based in Boston, and we have sites in Rochester, New York, and Somerville, Massachusetts, which is a smaller city in the Boston area. We've been around for 25 years, and as you see in this slide, it is really work that is social change powered by young people. And we have young people in the room here today who you'll hear from later in the afternoon, Carrie Mays and Nate. So as you walk around during the breaks and stuff, I encourage you to talk to them a little bit more about the actual work that they do, because they are the ones who are closer to it. They are on the lines doing this work. And I will just provide a little bit of an overview of kind of what we do. And to do that, I do want to start off with actually an activity that will give you a little bit of a better sense through action, kind of the foundations of what we do and our belief systems. So, if you don't mind, I know it's early, it's in the morning, but hopefully you've had your coffee. That will give you enough energy to get up and move around the room. And it's called seat shift. So, I will ask you to get up, move around in the room, find a different seat, and we'll do that a few different times. And then the last time, I'll ask you to pair up and talk to the person that you pair up with about a question that I will give to you. So are you guys ready to at least walk fast? Yes. Okay, so if everyone can stand up and push your chairs in, please. All right. So, I want you to move and find a different chair to stand at if this statement pertains to you. And as you're moving, shake hands with people around you. Just say hi quickly. And then when I say stop, that means you're just finding a different chair to stand next to, okay? And observe who moves and who doesn't, all right? So, I want you to move around the room and find a different chair to stand next to. If you've met or known a young person you think would be a more effective leader than some adults you know. All right. Shift, walk around. Who's walking? Okay, stop. Stand at a different seat. Claim a seat. Just hold that chair. That's your chair. All right? Okay, now I want you to move around. If you have been changed in terms of your thinking or action by a relationship you've held with someone or had with someone. All right? So move, shake hands as you move. Make sure you walk away from where you were. Stop. Find a seat. Claim that seat. Hold on to that seat. All right. Now I want you to move and find a different seat to claim if you feel that people and systems can change. You think that people and systems have the ability to change. All right. So walk around. Quickly shake hands. Walk, walk, walk. Okay, stop. I want you to claim a chair and sit down with that person next to you, and I want you to pair up with them. So make sure there's someone next to you. So just claim a chair, sit down. If it ends up being 3 people, that's okay. So sit down and pair up with the person sitting next to you. Is everybody paired up? Okay, so now I want you to I'm going to give you about 2 minutes. So I want you guys to talk to each other about a belief that you have a belief that you have that influences how you live your life or how you do your work. Okay? So just talk about a belief that you have that influences how you live and or how you work. So 2 minutes to speak with your partner. Make sure you introduce yourself. Halfway. Okay, wrap up your conversations. Okay, if I can just have your attention, and I just ask you if you could stay in this different chair that you're in for the remainder of my speech, my talk. And I know it might feel a little uncomfortable, antsy, like my bag is over there, my coffee is over there, but just so that kind of feel, asking you to feel kind of the work that we're doing. And in terms of this activity, who's sitting in a different seat than they were before? Pretty much everybody. And although you are in a different chair, right? You're still in the same room. And even though it's the same room, the way that you see the room is a little bit different. And in terms of the work of teen empowerment, that's what we're trying to do, right? We're trying to shift people's different perspectives of how they see young people, how they see civic engagement, how they see policies, how they see different systems that's happening that affect young people, and especially young people in communities that are usually ignored or under-resourced and not asked about their opinion or their thoughts or their solutions and all of that good stuff. And so with our work, as you can see here, right, our work is to empower youth and adults as agents of individual, institutional, and social change. And the way we do that a lot is really we believe in the power of relationships. So as I had you guys walking and changing perspective in this activity, I also had you connecting in different ways. Even though you were just shaking hands and saying your name, it was very short, but it kind of shifted the energy a little bit, right, in the room. And then even further, when you had the actual conversation with someone, raise your hand if you had a conversation with somebody you did not know before today. Look at that. We just created, I don't know how many people are here, but perhaps 60 new relationships just in 2 minutes. right? And some conversations are going to be a little more powerful than others and have a greater shift in that 2 minutes than others. But even if out of that 60 different relationships, 10 of them are just amazing and makes you think a little bit differently and shifts your action, we're already on our way to making that change. And so we believe that in order to do that, we have to have young people at the table, right? And so our belief is that young people need to be not just given a chance, but supported and provided with resources. And we actually pay our young people to be community organizers because we say that we value young people, but by putting money behind it, we're also saying, look, it's not just words, but we are going to give you we're going to value what you bring to us, right? What you have, your experiences, your the tools that you have to make change is valuable, and we will support that with money and resources. And so some of the things that our young people do is that they work in partnership with different community members, and like our mission says, it is about partnerships between youth and adults, partnerships between individuals and society, between systems, between policies and all that stuff. And what they do is they identify different issues that's happening and affecting them in the community. Some of the issues are negative youth-police relationships, violence in the communities, divisive relationships across racial lines, lack of positive relationships with adults, lack of youth voice in policies and systems, and lack of authentic opportunities for youth leadership. And like I said before, we really believe that they have the power to change and shift the conversation and shift what's happening and shift behaviors. So a little bit back to the activity that we just did. So really what we're talking about is activism through shifting. And what we try to do with the work that we engage in is to shift all these things which are related to each other, right? We're shifting negative experiences that people have with each other. So oftentimes, young people and adults are in spaces where adults are speaking to them, or they're there to solve the problem that young people have. What's happening in the streets? Why are they fighting? Why are there guns? Why is there violence? And to shift that, and now when you have conversations with youth, it's not just about the problem, but what are the experiences that you have? What are the solutions that they have? So by shifting that, you shift the relationships that people have, you shift the negative beliefs that people begin to have, and then you shift from, as your pair question, right? Your belief impacts how you do things. So then we shift negative behavior, shift negative culture, and then as a result, we're shifting equity, resources, and power dynamics that exist. And so the impact that we have, or we're working to have, is improved racial relationships, decrease in violence, more equality in the systems, youth and community-informed policies, improved relationships and trust in communities, and development of skilled leaders. So this impact we're looking at on the individual level, interpersonal level, and in the institutional level. And that's happening with peer-to-peer, as well as peer-to-adult and peer-to-systems. So just very briefly, I'll end a little bit to illustrate just one of the work that we do. Like I said, we work on a variety of different issues. Our main thing is to bring young people and their voice into every space that we can around all the variety of different issues. One of the things that we have been doing for the last 25 years is bringing young people and police officers together to do all those shifting that I talked about. So oftentimes, young people and police are engaged when something around being arrested or criminal activity is happening, or they're searching a neighborhood. So by bringing young people with police together in a different setting, you're changing how they interact. And we have been bringing them together for 25 years. Through that, we've developed training. So the police officers in New York and in Somerville, all their cadets go through training with teen empowerment. And we're working on that in Boston. But then also they work on different activities with police to bring to the communities, and also have conversations with the police around policy and try to get their support. And there's actually just an illustration of that impact. And Carrie and Nate can talk about that a little bit more if you want to talk to them during break. But there was a police officer who sent a very misogynistic, racist email to his coworker, kind of saying, you know, pictures, images of black men in hoodies and young black females in carnival, and kind of saying that they were ratchet and that, you know, these youth have met their match with the police, kind of stuff. Language that was very troublesome. And usually what happens with that is, okay, you would fire the police officer and then kind of end it there. And what this work that we've been doing, just an illustration of that shift, is we brought the command, the leadership of the BPS system, BPD, and young people to have a conversation with this police officer, so that he can start to understand why his actions are very harmful and why it's not just a joke or he made a mistake. And usually their narrative goes, okay, I apologize, I get fired, and the conversation ends there, right? And so this moves it forward, and they had these conversations a few different times. So that's just an illustration of the many, many different things that we do. So if you have further questions, you can talk to us during break. Thank you very much. You can go to your seats now. Back to your seats.
Thank you. So I think you can understand why I get so excited to get to work with teen empowerment whenever we do. So I'll give you a moment to get back to your seats, and then we'll continue with the next presenter. And I realized I also forgot to announce a bit about the structure of the panel at the beginning of it. So the way most of the panels are organized, each panelist will talk for about 12 to 15 minutes, and then afterwards there's time for discussion and questions, and we'll have people around the room with mics for people who want to talk and ask questions during the discussion period. So that's why we aren't opening it up to questions after each panelist. There will be time for discussion at the end. So it's now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Barbara Ferman. She's professor of political science at Temple University and founder and executive director of the University Community Collaborative, a Temple University-based initiative that provides media-based youth leadership development programming for high school students. She's published several books and numerous articles on urban politics, racial integration, youth civic engagement, and education. And you will also be hearing from some of the young people she works with who will be leading the film and discussion at lunchtime today, as well as I think on a panel tomorrow. So welcome, Dr. Ferman.
It's always very daunting to go after two wonderful speakers. So next time around, I'm going to go first. So actually, before I get into my comment, and I don't have pictures, I don't have slides, but I have brochures. So this is wonderful. It's, first of all, I've never been to Charlottesville before, and I did get in yesterday and walk around a bit, and it seems really, really lovely. But it's also shaping up to be a morning of intersections. Where'd Valerie go? Valerie? She went. Oh, okay. So Valerie, actually, when she was in Philadelphia, worked with me at the Collaborative. She left to pursue a PhD at University of Pennsylvania. I was heartbroken because she was amazing, but she's gotten more amazing, so that's fantastic. Teen empowerment. I actually used some of the articles on teen empowerment on youth police conversations in one of my classes. Connie's chapter on the environmental commons I'm using in my class now, and I used last semester, and I think the framing of it is just absolutely brilliant. I haven't seen anything like that. And I guess the last intersection is, so Connie mentioned Eleanor Ostrom several times, and like the late Professor Ostrom, I'm also female. I'm also a political science professor, and I'm also a marginalized political science professor. So maybe there's a Nobel Prize in my future, but I doubt it. Okay, so I'm going to talk about using a social justice approach to youth leadership development, and my comments are based on the University Community Collaborative, which is an initiative at Temple that I started 20 years ago, and since gray seems to be a theme too, when I don't think I had any gray hairs, but they've been coming more and more. So I'm going to talk a little bit, give a little bit overview of the collaborative, then talk about, I hate microphones, then talk about social justice framework, what that is to use a social justice framework, why we use it, and then give one example of a project we did at the collaborative that hopefully illustrates that. So as I said, I started the collaborative 20 years ago. Initially, we had one program, the Voices After School program. Over the years, we've evolved organically, and we've developed a continuum of youth leadership development programs. So we have after-school programs, credit-bearing, high school credit, credit-bearing internships, youth media production, and paid employment for high school students. All of our programming is on Temple's campus for numerous reasons, not the least of which is we want to demystify the university environment for high school students. Students come from all over Philadelphia, and as I like to say, we have high school students who could live 2 blocks from Temple, but we might as well be on Mars because they don't know anybody who went to college. A lot of times they don't even know people who graduated high school. So we want to demystify the university environment. And a lot of the students have ended up coming to Temple, which we think is great. Also, it's at Temple because I'm at Temple, and it gives us access to a lot of resources, most of which the university probably doesn't know anything about, so shh. So we've developed this continuum of leadership programs, and the sort of last part on the continuum is called our Leaders Corps, and the Leaders Corps right now we have, it varies in size from anywhere from like 12 to 16, am I okay? Yeah. And many of the Leader Corps members were participants when they were in high school in one or more of our programs. I have to go back, okay. One or more of our programs, they're now in college, Temple and other area universities, they're trained, they're paid, and they're the ones that work directly with the high school students. So we've developed a leadership pipeline within our organization. And I'm pleased to say that a lot of former Leader Corps members who've graduated college are now working in the nonprofit sector, some in city government. At one point, 3 were working in the mayor's office, which was awesome, the prior mayor. A lot have gone into teaching, some have pursued higher education, policy-related programs, some have gone to law school, et cetera. We work with about 120 to 140 high school students a year, and we have summer programming too. Demographically, roughly 85% are African American, about 8% Latino, maybe 3% Asian, it varies, and 3% other. And the projects are all youth-driven, meaning that the young people identify the issue and they collectively have to work collectively in small groups, identify the issue that they want to work on, figure out how they're going to frame it, what their message is, what's the change they want, who has the power to make that change, how do they get to that person, and then figure out who else in the community is working on those issues. So the softer it is here, the louder it is, okay. Who else is working on those issues that they could partner with and the like, and then they do usually a media-based project. For a long time it was exclusively film, but we've been experimenting with radio, podcasts, spoken word, dance, music, and the like. Not surprisingly, the issues that they've identified have to do with racial profiling, police brutality, how the media depicts young people of color, the poor quality of public education, and on and on and on. And actually it's interesting because one of our recent projects was on environmental justice, and I remember it actually came from one of our high school students who was like 15 years old, and he said, I think we should do environmental justice. And I'm thinking, I didn't say it, but I'm thinking, how are you going to convince your high school buddies to do that? And one of the high school buddies said something like, oh, nobody's going to be interested in that, to which he responded, they've drunk the water in Philly schools, they'll be interested in that. So it is directly involved in their lives. Okay, so that's the collaborative. What's a social justice framework? Social justice framework involves students in the construction of knowledge by soliciting, honoring, and respecting their values, their experience, their expertise. To put it simply, it's the opposite of what most schools do. It's also about exposing students to concepts of power, privilege, access, and the like, and oppression. So we go through all of the isms: racism, sexism, homophobism, and on and on and on. And also it has a focus on the intersectionality of those. So how are race and class related? How does that relate to gender? How does that relate to sexual orientation and the like? Why do we use a social justice orientation? Not only because we think it's the right thing to do, but especially when you're working with young people who've been marginalized by larger systems of power and institutions, is one of the tendencies, we all have this tendency to internalize the things that are around us. So if you're in a situation where people are always telling you, wow, you're doing a great job, you're gonna be fantastic, you probably internalize confidence, self-esteem, all the things that are great. However, if you're in an environment where institutions and people are telling you you're not good, you're worthless, you're criminal, you internalize that and you have low self-esteem, no confidence, despair, apathy, etc. So we try and counter that by using a social justice framework. And another thing about a social justice framework is you create alternative narratives to how the world works. So rather than seeing things as individual issues, we try and connect individual issues to larger systems, to institutions. So connect the personal to the institutional. So for example, if you look at Philadelphia or most urban areas, there's very large racial achievement gaps in the schools. Well, one explanation could be people of color don't care about education. They're lazy, blah, 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 blah. That's an individual interpretation. However, if you look at the larger system, if you look at funding inequities, if you look at resources that schools have and that other schools don't have, if you look at some schools that have metal detectors, uniforms, and on and on and on, you get a very different picture of it. It's not the young people, it's the larger system in which those young people are operating. So again, trying to get young people to understand it's not you, there's a larger system out there. And once they understand that, and then we can name it, then we could start moving towards collective action, because it's no longer your personal issue, it's our issue together. So creating these alternative narratives begins with the individual's voice, with the individual's story. In all of our programs, we try and encourage young people to say what's on their mind. And initially, a lot of them are resistant because they don't believe us. But again, the people who are working directly with the high school students look like them, and oftentimes they're only a year or two older, come from the same neighborhood, so it's a different, and they've been through the programs. So one way to get the individual narrative out is through storytelling. And storytelling is really powerful because it could be cathartic. It also allows you to name a problem. It's hard to address something if you can't name it. So the school-to-prison pipeline, for example. Kids know that they go through a metal detector every day. Kids know that they and their peers are expelled or suspended from school. But when we start putting it together for them, the metal detector, the school that looks like a prison, the uniforms, underfunded schools, overfunded prisons, then they have a name for it. And then they can say, wait, there are alternative ways to deal with issues of discipline. We don't have to criminalize everything. So the storytelling enables that. It also allows for them to develop patterns because they see, oh my God, these 6 other kids have the same story that I do. Whoops. Therefore, it's not me, it's a larger system. Okay, moving right along. So complementing the social justice approach is also skill building. So we help them to pose problems, to listen, to critically analyze things. We do media production, we do media literacy and the like. And also knowledge building. So we try and expose our participants to movements that young people have been prominent in, which is just about every social justice movement you could think of: civil rights movement, Black Panthers, Black Lives Matter, Occupy Wall Street, etc. Okay, so getting young people to feel comfortable to share their stories requires a lot of trust building. One of the things we do is we work with young people in pretty small teams, could be anywhere from 8 to 14 or 15, and again, they're working with Leader Corps members who gain their trust and the like. Okay, so I want to fast forward now to one. We have 2 cases I was going to say, but one you're actually going to see the film during lunch. It's called Erasing Erasure. But I want to talk about an episode that Poppin', which is our award-winning youth-produced TV news show, did, and it was on youth and foster care. We had funding from one of our funders to do shared learning, which nobody knew what it was, but we took the money and did it. And we took our youth media producers to New York to meet with youth media organizations up there and to share their experience as young media makers. So the professional blends into the personal, and they start talking about their personal lives, and it turned out that 2 of our high school students in Poppin were in foster care. And several of the New York kids were in foster care, so they started talking about that. And they came back to Philly. They wanted to do an episode on youth in foster care. And I have to tell, all of our videos are available on YouTube, by the way. It's very powerful and very painful. I really didn't know much about the foster care system. I got to tell you, I mean, I knew it was bad. I didn't know how bad it was. It's absolutely dreadful. And in some places, it's actually criminal. Anyway, so they did the episode. We screened it. City Council hosted a screening for us. The new commissioner of Department of Human Resources, which is responsible for foster care, hosted a screening with all the top-level staff. I could go on and on. But as a result of those screenings, and we brought the young people with us who were in foster care for a Q&A. So it was up close and personal. The young people were right there to tell their story. They couldn't have gotten in there without us, so they need the scaffolding from adults, but it was their story, not ours. And as a result of that, we've started a lot of conversations in Philadelphia around foster care. I'll just say one last thing. There's a organization in Philadelphia. I won't name names. There's an organization, you can watch the video, there's an organization in Philadelphia that should be shut down as a result of how they treat young people. And I'm told that there are investigations going on into that organization now, and I'd like to think that our video had something to do with that. So again, social justice approach. It's empowering, and it can lead to actual changes. And how am I doing? I'm done. Okay, I'm done. There you go. Cool. Oh, but I'm sorry. During lunch, the film that Stormy Kelsey and India Fenner, 2 of our Leader Corps members and former program participants on Erasing Erasure, will tell you more about our stuff.
All right, so we've got about half an hour for questions, comments, thoughts, and when you'd like to speak, just raise your hand and someone will bring a microphone to you. I'll open up the floor. Yeah, Nick.
There it goes. So 2 of you mentioned that some of the participants in your programs receive pay for their work, which is great because it's modeling professionalism. But I'd like to know how you pay for that, or how you manage that, because it's something I'm looking into.
I can start. Yeah, sure. So I am not the person who is the expert in the funding of our program, but our funding is a combination of individual and some government funding and some foundations. But to be honest, it's been a challenge because of that idea that people don't necessarily value young people. And the work that they do, it's definitely, a lot of times they think of this as it's an after-school program, right? Versus this is work, this is real work that young people are working on, making real change. And so we've actually been challenged in terms of trying to fund our programming. And, you know, a lot of times they look at it as it's expensive. You have, 14 young people at a site, they're, you pay them and they work about 15, 20 hours a week, that's a lot, right? And so people tend to only focus on the individual change, and they say, well, you're only impacting 14 people, rather than seeing that we're impacting a whole community and, like the slide that I was talking about, shifting things. So it is a challenge. But like I said, we do that. We try, I think we're going to try to focus more on individuals, so that, because of the nature of the shift of what funding is. And I'll just put in a plug as well. So I'm Director of Consulting and Training. So I'm the only arm in our department that does bring in some money. It's not a lot. It's only 3%, but we want to increase it. And so as, I modeled with you with the activity that we did, when we bring people together, things don't just happen by magic. We don't just say, hey, everyone talk, but we use a very facilitative, interactive model, which that was a sample of, and actually we have a book that talks about our model and gives you different ideas. So part of my role is to, one, spread this model to other people, but also provide technical support and provide trainings, and that gives 3%, and we want to increase that because it is increasingly getting harder to get people to value.
So the short answer is endless grant writing. So our budget is about $350,000 a year, and it's largely from foundations, but we also get some city money for our out-of-school time programs. So the Leaders Corps, we go up and back on this. Are they participants? Are they staff? I mean, they're paid staff, part-time staff. And another thing that helps out there is federal work-study money when students qualify for that, because the feds pick up 75% of that. So that really helps a lot. In terms of the participants, until a few years ago, actually one of our grants from the city provided stipends for them based on attendance and performance. It wasn't a lot, it was only $50 a month, but it was better than nothing. So yeah, it's a lot of grant writing, and we also do training and technical assistance for fee.
Good morning. Thank you. So this is a center that focuses on research and the intersection of research with practice and policy. So my question would be for today is if each of you would be willing to comment on what the role of research is in the work you're doing, and if there is no such role, to even comment on that.
So is this on? It's okay. I would say the luxury that researchers have is to sit back and think, and activists and practitioners don't have that luxury. So in a sense, we have a responsibility to partner. And in some ways, the luxury allows you to articulate what you're seeing in the practice. And I mean, it's really why we have to get out of the academy and the ether of the academy, that basically where we teach graduate students to talk to one another in a more and more siloed world. So it really speaks to the fact that universities and research and academia is just really, unless it's responsive to the public in the way in which collaborating and listening to what's going on the ground, I mean, I think we're just like outdating ourselves. So the role of the research, I would say, is to document what's happening. And Omar Gesios and I were just talking earlier. When trained researchers go and work in practice and applied work, what they can bring, I mean, it's not to say that all practice is perfect, but they can bring relationships that improve youth development programming because they can help to reflect. And it's not a question of the right measures or the right, because measures developed in a lab are not the right things. It's to listen what's happening on the ground and then to say, oh, it sounds like what you're saying is. How about we could document that? I would stay away from language like evaluation. I think it's totally off-putting. I think to say that something worked or didn't work is really a lazy way to do research. Because there's something that's working and there's something that needs to be improved no matter how bad or perfect any program is. So I would say we need a huge dose of humility in graduate education, that we don't have the answers unless we learn to listen better.
So our work is on the ground, and so like Dr. Flanagan said, we don't always have the luxury to really talk to research and do more of that and more partnership. I would say that we would love to have more of that because we feel like our work is valuable, and like I spoke about earlier, it's not being seen. And sometimes, unfortunately, with this world, you slap a PhD behind something, people all of a sudden were like great and amazing, right? When like you don't have that PhD, it's like, what is this, right? And so it's unfortunate that we have to do that, but that's about the, how can we use like the reality of how people think and use the power that researchers have to help practitioners and different organizations to really show that this is working. And I'm not saying, you know, like to support it, really show and elevate. And I appreciate that you talk about our work, and that's what we all ask, is that talk about the work that is working, that you see in the field. The more that people talk about it, the more that people who have PhDs talk about it, the more that people start valuing it, right? In the spaces where people can fund, and that's where power sits sometimes, right? In terms of getting that funding to getting people to say, oh, this is value. If I had 2 celebrities endorse our program, all of a sudden, right, we're gonna be like the most amazing thing in the world. And it's unfortunate that when we have a whole community and neighborhood saying this is amazing and we've seen differences, that it doesn't always have the same impact. So we ask for people who are in the role of research who can bring us to conferences like this, have people learn more about our work. That would be very helpful. And for ourselves, I think, we are in a bubble sometimes, and so it is helpful for researchers to be real with us too when they're working with us in a way that is productive, like, we saw this work has an impact, and we have a role to be open to hearing about things that might actually not be working.
Sorry. So I actually have several responses to that. One, I think, would be that we need to rethink how we conceptualize research. So the media programs that we do, these young people are doing research. And they're putting stuff out there through their eyes. The whole thing with sort of credentializing and a few letters after your name works against us because they don't have the PhD or the this or the that, but it's valuable. And I can't suppose to know what a young person is thinking. Young person knows what he or she is thinking. I can't know, and my background is very different. So I think that's one thing, is for us to reconceptualize research and to teach it to our graduate students and undergraduates. Second is, and this is interesting, so I do not come out of an education background. I don't come out of a youth development background. And so we were doing programming for quite a while, and then I started reading stuff on youth development. I'm like, oh my God, we're actually doing this right. And then I thought, yeah, because a lot of it is common sense. Meeting people where they are, respecting their backgrounds, it's common sense. And I had someone who was on my full-time staff. She was our media and communications manager. And like Valerie, she also left to pursue a PhD at Northwestern in learning sciences. And she said to me, like after the first semester, she says, or quarter, she said, oh my God, this is so exciting. I'm like learning about the theories that explain the work we've been doing. It's like, yeah. So there has to be that intersection between theory and practice. And I do think increasing the visibility of this and getting stakeholders to understand what's really involved in this. It's common sense, but that doesn't mean it's easy. It is anything but easy working with people, and especially with adolescents, because hormones are raging and all kinds of other stuff. And that you can't just say, oh, it worked, it didn't work. It's highly nuanced what's going on, and impacts. How many of us 20 years later a light bulb goes off and like, oh my God, that teacher who said that. We're not going to track 20 years. So I think the other part is trying to educate funders and others about what this stuff is about and what they should be looking at. So again, yeah, that's it.
So I was wondering for Dr. Lee if you would say the name of your book. And also I was curious to hear when you first started meeting with the police, what was that like? What were the challenges you faced and how did you overcome them? Thank you.
Thank you for putting doctor in front of my name. I have not earned it yet, but I'll take it. And I actually didn't write the book. I'll take that too, though. Okay. But our founder, Stanley Pollock, the founder of Teen Empowerment, wrote the book to spread the model, and I'm forgetting what. Moving Beyond Icebreakers. It is actually very good in terms of for practitioners too, and how you run groups and all that good stuff. So it really supports our program. So check it out if you want to look at it during break, but it's on Kindle as well. Anyhow, what was the question? Sorry.
The police, the challenges of working with the
challenges
police
of working with the
how
police.
you address this.
So the work started about 25 years ago, and I wasn't around then. I was alive, but I wasn't around at Teen Empowerment, even though I've been there for 13 years. I think that again, you have to start with the relationships, right? To start first with who among the police do we have some relationships with? And it works the same way with youth. Like, who is maybe they're ready, they want to shift and move the direction a little bit or the conversation, and then you start working with them. And then they help and shift their peers. So just like young people are shifting their peers, police officers are shifting their peers, right? So you cannot expect that you're going to just go in and you want to make a change. And leadership obviously is very, very important. So because we started off 25 years ago in Boston doing that groundwork of having, identifying those police officers who can be influential on their peers, even if they don't have the title of, chief of police officers, or they're not the police commissioner, it's fine, because it's about people who can move relationships, and you don't need a title in order to be able to move relationships and move people's thoughts. And so by starting there and having them meet with young people and have conversations, it's not easy, of course, because you have resistance on both ends, right? There's a lot of work that we do with young people beforehand to unpack the feelings about police officers. There's huge resistance. And we've done a lot of that work between our young people and police officers to build that. But when we've opened it to, when we do community events, we've seen where young people won't step into a room because a police officer is there. So we've tried to do different things in terms of, that's where the young people influence their peers. Like, come on, just try it. It's fine. I know this police officer is cool. You can come in. And that's why we do fun things like basketball tournaments and things like that to bring people as well. So we've been lucky because of this work now that we have partnerships in all 3 cities with the police commissioner. And we actually in Somerville, teen empowerment was part of the search committee to find the new commissioner. So that's where we talk about, that shift, all that work is now being seen in actual policy change, right? So now we have a commissioner in Somerville who is very pro-youth development, pro-community policing, and there's been a lot of change, but there are still police officers there who are resistant. We've heard stories about them rolling their eyes when they hear the word teen empowerment sometimes, even though they're sitting in the dialogues with us. So there's still change that we have to make, but by having the command leader, believe in that approach, it works.
And I think Dr. Watts up here.
All right, I'm going to be on the panel later, but I want to sort of pick up on what folks here said about research, your question Dr. Tolan made. We've been doing some research, and we've gotten really interested in trying to bring together 3 sectors. And this follows a little bit on what you were saying, Connie, is academics who consider themselves activist scholars, social justice educators who are working in the classroom or working close to the classroom, and also along with them, nonprofits that do youth work. And the last sector being community organizations that work with young people, youth organizing, which I'll be talking about later. And the idea is that I think we need each other, because if you want to get money from foundations, research is going to have to come into play. You're going to have the folks with all the alphabets behind their names. And so having the right, I emphasize back to your humility, the right academic, you can form that. And teachers who are in the classroom, who identify young people through social justice education, who are interested in civic and political issues, if we can get those folks, have them have experiences with community organizers of all ages. I'm talking about young community organizers, not just adults. Then I think the synergy there is possible. So this is a plug for the call to action. I'm going to folks who are interested in this idea, please come and talk with me.
Thank you.
I just want to add that the work we do, the young people are age 14 to 21 that we work with.
So I'll ask a question while we're waiting. So this may build a little bit. You referenced this a little bit in the discussion about police, but all three of you talked about relationships, right? And the importance of relationships, the importance of collaboration. And I'm curious if maybe each of you could talk a little bit about maybe what the most challenging part of that relationship building has been in your own work with young people, and how you have addressed that, what you did to sort of nurture those relationships or to shift negative relationships. If you said you obviously started talking about that with the police, but for Connie or Barbara, or if you have additional things to say.
You can go ahead and start.
So, for better and for worse, I really don't work directly with the youth because I have, my full-time job as professor and then my full-time job as director and raising money, et cetera. But what I've seen in terms of the full-time staff that kind of work directly with the youth, the first part is just the trust building. And most of, as I said before, most of the leader corps and some of the staff are the same demographic as the young people, which helps a lot. It'd be a lot harder for me to, but just the trust building, which really, really takes a lot. I think one of the hard parts, and this does not interfere with the relationship building, and sometimes it even strengthens it, is all the baggage that some of these kids come with through no fault of their own. I talked about the youth in foster care episode. One of our pop and crew members who's in high school and is also in foster care, he's absolutely amazing. I mean, if he hadn't been in foster care, he's amazing. But what he's gone through, nobody should have to go through that. And how he's come out the way he is, I certainly wouldn't come out with his strength and resiliency. So, staff have gone, their job description is not where their job ends, it's where their job begins. They testify in court, they try and find respite housing, sometimes they provide the couch, et cetera, et cetera. Oftentimes they don't tell me these things, which is probably good, I'd have more gray hairs. But it really is about all of that wraparound stuff, even though we are not a social service agency, but you can't separate the two. So I don't know if that responds.
Well, and I would add, I think also you caveated your beginning by saying, well, I don't really work directly with the youth, but in fact, we've also been talking about the relationship between researchers and programs. So in fact, there are relationships that you're also managing and doing, even if you're not thinking about the youth relationship. So,
I think, relationships are very big, right? So you can talk about relationships, young people to young people, staff to young people who are working in the community, and then all the adults. So we're always managing relationships and trying to figure that out. And I don't want to I know I talked about it, but it really does work. Like, this is how we manage relationships. We use these activities. We force people in a fun way to talk to people that they might not have, right? We kind of go at it in a more subtle way. But the key really is, like, when, the relationships with young people, we really make sure that everything's the youth development approach. And really understanding young people and where they're coming from, even on the hard days when, some young people are leading with their trauma. And expressing it, and it might not always feel good. And it's, as a person who was in the programs, there were some very, very challenging moments. But being able to always come back to that positive youth development framework and always making sure that you go, use that. And then we also have a behavior management structure that we use that uses that approach as well. But I would say that oftentimes people talk about how we have to manage young people and those relationships and how to make them work. But I would say a lot of the similar things that we say young people need, adults need as well. They need to feel powerful. They need to have resources. And in any space we create a space of safety so that people feel all those things. And when it's like your needs, right? The Maslow's needs, hierarchy of needs. If you have those needs met, you're more willing to be open and have those relationships, and then hear something different and challenge what you've been doing.
So in true academic fashion, when I don't have an answer, I'll make up something else. I couldn't think of any answer, but I actually, Elon and I have to thank Yang for that. Breaking up the way in which we typically lecture and do this thing, it was just so great the way you forced us to talk to one another right away. That was really great. So one of the chances I had was to talk to Elon, who's in the audience at North Carolina State, and we were talking about how we maintain hope, particularly when it seems like things keep going backwards. And so there's one instance, and this, I guess, is relationship. So these groups in Southeast Michigan bring the kids together for a kind of collective forum at the end of the year, representatives from every one of the programs. And when I drive through Detroit, I mean, I just lose hope that these kids in Detroit, these are fourth graders, so this is a story from a fourth grade group, and many of the projects in Detroit are actually figuring out what to do about the blighted, abandoned properties. You know, because they're places where drug dealing goes on, they're places that are dangerous for the kids, they're right next to the schools. So they're figuring out who's in charge, what to do, surveying the neighborhood about, if we got rid of that, what would you put in its place? And so one of the questions at these forums where the kids all come together and present their work was, well, you've been doing this project, you know, every year the fourth graders are doing this and you keep getting older. How do you maintain hope? This little girl said, well, it's like I say to Esmeralda here. Someday you're going to grow up and be a mother. And you know, when you can point to that park over there to your kids, you can say, I helped to make that happen. And I'm like, that, I mean, for me, those relationships, that getting out of the academy and actually seeing what people do on the ground, and how these kids have an aspirational notion of, we could do that, and that's possible. It's, I mean, those relationships are very rewarding.
Yeah, right up here.
Hi, thank you so much for those excellent presentations. Especially, I'm stealing the activity that you did. Just giving you a heads up.
There's
and I think
more.
there's, and I'm buying that. I'm buying that book, but I will give you full credit for that activity when I steal it and use it with a group of people. So I do want to say, I want to give a little plug before I ask my question, that the two of the people, Barbara and Connie, both have chapters in a book that I co-edited called Contemporary Youth Activism. It's a 20-chapter book that has a lot about youth activism in the United States. I highly recommend it. And they were phenomenal chapters, so if you want to read more about what they both talked about, they both have chapters in that book about that. But I actually wanted to delve a little bit into the idea of leadership. And all of you have talked a little bit about young people as being leaders in what you do. But could you talk a little bit about how that leadership manifests, and in terms of how it sort of, to what degree it's directing the organization's the direction of the organization, or the projects that get taken up, and also sort of how it manifests maybe in the interpersonal relationships within the organization and between the organization and your allies.
Yes, Sonia, you beat me to the punch. I was actually going to plug your book because I think, and also you and Jerusha for like dealing with at least 18 contributors. I would have shot myself, especially academic ones. Well, yeah. So, I mean, the fact that she put all that effort in is getting the work of youth organizations out there. Okay, so leadership, I think just like research, we need to conceptualize how we think about leadership, because I think traditionally we think of the leader from on high who dictates and yada, 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 which kind of runs counter to a social justice perspective. So I think there's just like leadership in our own lives, and taking leadership over our own lives, and part of that has to, and being able to work in a group. So part of that sometimes means not saying anything, listening, which again goes counter to our traditional notions of leadership, and being able to think through a situation, being able to be responsible, be reliable. So if Sonia, you say, okay, Barbara, this is your task, I actually do it when I'm supposed to do it, et cetera. So I think all of those skills. And I think, and one of the things I was going to say in my comments, but I was running out of time, is one of the things we have at the Collaborative is this, what I like to call a layered system of mentoring. So the Leader Corps members are mentoring the high school students. They're getting paid, but they're mentoring the high school students. Within the Leader Corps, we have some people, like Stormy, how long have you been? 3 years in the Leader Corps? So she's like one of our seasoned senior members. You're going to get gray hair soon, too. Yeah, right. So she's now in a position where she's mentoring some of the newer Leader Corps members. And her immediate supervisor, Noela Cabral, who's amazing, she's our media and communications manager, she's mentoring Stormy. So it's like, we have all these different layers, and the age gap is not that great then, which is why I don't deal with the youth, because there's a huge age gap. So again, I think that's sort of how the leadership manifests itself. It's sort of like step by step. I mean, everything we do is organic and incremental, and I think that's how the leadership evolves as well.
So if you, at every table I try to put some information about teen empowerment's belief systems and kind of the organizing model. But to touch base on that a little bit, you don't need to necessarily look at that right now, but in terms of leadership, so we have 2 adult program coordinators at each site to work with about 14 young people. And so in our model, like we said, it's a youth-adult partnership. So that's the idea. So of course, our staff, we have a training curriculum, and a lot of that is this interactive model, and a lot of it is dialogue, like unpacking what are the issues that's happening, what do you see work or doesn't work in your community, and so it together, they create these strategies. And so that leadership that develops within young people is through modeling that they see that happens with their program coordinators, modeling they see amongst their own peers. And so it's kind of developing leadership together. And there's, we as adults have to provide structures and resources, and if we're going to say we want your information, we want your input and solution, what is the structure, what's the belief system that we are functioning off that supports that? And so we, in our work, the young people, they're learning facilitation skills, which we'll see later in this afternoon. My young people will facilitate a conversation with you guys. So they facilitate a lot of those meetings that we have with police, that we have with community. They, showcase their stories through speeches. They use a lot of the arts. So we also have a record kind of company, so TE Studios. And so the young people were managing that. They help in our hiring process of adult staff. They, meet and build relationships and give input to the board. So it happens, and we would like to see things happen on an even a larger scale than sometimes we have capacity to do, but that's how we have their leadership develop. And then it translates into how they're seen in the community and in the spaces. Even when we're not there, they take on that leadership. They naturally just take that on. And then in their own lives, in the survey that we did, about like 85% the young people have noted that they help to de-escalate a conflict in their life.
So, okay. So thank you. Please join me in thanking our panelists.